Okay, so this is the geometry word problems chapter in my book, Overcoming Digital SAT Math. And remember, if you have a copy of this, attempt the problems on your own first and attempt corrections on your own for the best results. And always pay attention to the video description for any links or extra information that I post over time that I think you might find helpful in reference to this chapter's topic. So let's go and start with number 1. So pause to read if you haven't already. So this is the formula for the volume of a cylinder, where R is the radius, H is the height, and V is the volume. So we know the radius is 5, so I'm going to put 5 in for the radius. We know that the volume is 500 pi, so I'm going to put in 500 pi for the volume. And then let's see what our equation looks like. So this is what that looks like. Now the question is asking us to find H, the height. So all I have to do now is solve for H. So I see that there's a pi on each side. And then so now I just have to do 500 divided by 5 squared, which is 25. And that gives me what H is. So the answer should be B, so 20 units. Okay, pause to read number 2 if you haven't already. So I've written the formula for volume of a sphere and volume of a cone up here. So they both have the same radius, so we can treat these R's as the same R. And we know that the cone has a height of 9, so I can plug in 9 for the height right there for H. And then it says the volume of the sphere is thrice, meaning 3 times the volume of the cone. So I could write that out like this, and I'm trying to find out what is the value of R. So what I can do now is I can say, okay, I know volume of the sphere is the same thing as this equation. I know volume of the cone is the same thing as this. So I could just replace volume of the sphere here with 4/3 pi r cubed, and then replace volume of the cone with pi over 3 r squared times h. So let's do that. So now that I've done that, I can also plug in what h is, because I know h is 9. So now I have that. So now let's start crossing out things that we can in order to solve for what r is, because we only have one unknown, r right here. So r squared, if I divide by r squared on each side, this cancels out to 1, and then I just have r left over here. Now, I can also cancel out a pi and a pi right here, so then it's just 1/3 times 3, which is just 1. So now what I have really is just 9 over on this side is equal to, and then I have 4/3 r. So now, remember, I'm solving for r, so I have to get it by itself by dividing by 4/3 on each side, which is the same thing as multiplying by 3/4, multiplying by the reciprocal of the fraction. So I could say r is equal to 9 over 1 times 3/4, which equals 27 over 4. Right over there. So now let's do cone. So volume of a cone is equal to this formula right here. And we have the height, we have the radius, so we have h, and we have r that we could plug in, and then we have the volume of the cone once we solve that. So let's do that. So I'm going to say that this is equal to, let me just erase this little thing right there, pi over 3 times r, which is 4, squared times the height, which is 15. So 3 goes into 15 5 times. So now I have pi times 4 squared is 16. So 16 pi times 5, which just gives me 80 pi as my answer. And I keep forgetting to move over when I'm going and doing this. So all I did was I said, okay, I'm going to plug in what r and h are based on this problem. So the 4 went there, the 15 went there. And then I just said, okay, now I'm going to simplify by cross-canceling right here. So 3 goes into 3 one time. It goes into 15 5 times. So then it was just pi times 4 squared times 5, or pi times 4 squared is 16 times 5. And that gives you 80 pi. Okay, pause to read number 4 if you haven't already. So the volume of a cube is equal to the edge length, which we'll say is s cubed, right? So we know the volume is 64. So that's equal to the edge length cubed, or sorry, that's cubed. I wrote it 2 by accident. It's supposed to be cubed 3. Let me actually just rewrite that so it looks better. So all I have to do to answer this question is solve for what s is. So I just have to think, okay, what number cubed equals 64? And that number would be 4, so it would be B. Okay, pause to read number 5 if you haven't already. Okay, my drawing skills are horrendous, so I apologize in advance. So we want to know how many feet are there on each side of this base. The base is a square, remember, because it says there's a square base, so that means each side of that base right down here is going to be the same. And we know that this whole rectangular box can hold up to 75 cubic feet of water, so we know that the volume is equal to 75 cubic feet, right? Now, volume of a rectangular prism is equal to length times width times height. We know the height is 15, so we can plug in 15 for h. And then we know that the length would be the same as the width because it has a square base. So we could just replace that with like x and x, since they're the same exact thing. So we could say it's x times h, which x being the side length of each of the sides on the base. And then we just plug in 15 for h and 75 for v, and then solve for x. So now when I do that, I have this. So I just need to divide by 15 on each side to get x squared by itself. So then when I divide, I get 5 is equal to x squared. Now that's not x. I need to get x by itself by doing the opposite of squaring, which is square rooting, to get rid of that little 2. So then I square root each side and get that x is equal to the square root of 5. Now I just need to see, okay, which of these answers fits that? Well, let's think of the perfect squares that we know. So we know that could be around this. So we know that we could have square root of 4 would be a little bit before this. And then we know that the square root of 9 would be a little bit after this. Well, square root of 4 is equal to 2. Square root of 9 is equal to 3. So that means that root 5 has to be between 2 and 3 feet. So the answer would be B. Okay, pause to read number 6 if you haven't already. So here are the formulas we're dealing with. Volume of a rectangular prism, like the rectangular box, is length times width times height, which we have those dimensions there. And then volume of a cube is equal to the side length cube, which we have that each of the sides for the cube is going to be 3 inches. And we want to know how many of these cubes fit into this rectangular prism box thing. So what we need to do is find the volume of the rectangle and then divide it by the volume of the cube to see how many of these cubes can fit into the space with the rectangular box. So let's do that. So volume of a rectangle on top would be length times width times height. So I'm going to do 12 times 6 times 3 over, and then volume of the cube on bottom would just be 3 cubed. So now I'm going to plug that in to see what I get. So when I plug that in my calculator, I get 8 as my answer, so it would be A. Okay, pause to read number 7 if you haven't already. So this is the formula for a surface area of a cube. You also can just think logically, surface area is the area of all the surfaces, all the faces on a cube. So like think of a dice like that you roll in like Monopoly or something. That has 6 sides to it, right? 6 faces. So that's why it's times 6, because you're doing the area of each of the sides. The area of one of the square faces is going to be side length times side length because they're the same. And then you just multiply that by the 6 different faces that there are. And that gives you the total surface area, the area of all the surfaces on the shape. So we know surface area is equal to 54 square centimeters. So this is going to be 54. And then we know it's equal to all of this, so then we could find out what the side length is, or the edge length, however you want to call it, for that cube. And then what we can do is we can say, oh, I also know volume of a cube is just the side length cube. So once I find S here from this equation, I can plug it in here to find the volume. So let's do that. Surface area, 54. Is equal to 6 times s squared. So now I'm going to divide each side by 6. That's going to give me 9 is equal to s squared. And then square root each side, and that gives me that the side length is equal to 3. So now I'm going to plug that in here to find the volume of the cube. So that's going to be 3 cubed, which is 27. A. Okay, pause to read number 8 if you haven't already. Okay, so when you draw it out, it looks kind of like this. That's my best attempt, I'm sorry. The diameter is 8, and the total height, like the whole height, is going to be 11 for this. That's important to remember. It's the whole entire thing. Now, volume of the cone is equal to this equation where r is the radius for the cone and h is the height for the cone. So this height is not 11 because 11 is the height of the cone put together with the hemisphere. So you have to remember that this is a different height right here. Now, volume of a hemisphere is just half of a sphere. So I just take the volume of a sphere formula, this right here, and multiply by a half to get the volume of the hemisphere. So let's try to figure out, because we can figure out easily what the radius is for each of these, because it's the same, they're connected right there, they're sharing that base. So the radius, if the diameter is 8, the radius is half of that. So the radius has to be 4. Now let's determine the height for the cone. The height for the cone, let's see, the whole height is 11. Now, a sphere, the diameter doesn't have to just go this way. Like the diameter can go up and down as well. So if we have half of a sphere, like pretend like we extended the sphere this way, so we have half the sphere on top. If it was extended this way, you could say the whole diameter goes like this. The whole way would be 8, so half of that would be 4. So this is 4, what is it? Centimeters or inches, 4 inches tall. So the height of the hemisphere kind of is how you could think about it, is 4 inches tall. So we have to subtract that from 11 to get the height of the cone. So that would give us 7 for the height of the cone. So now we have what we can plug into this for radius and height. And also this one has the same radius. So all we're going to do is plug in and add these up. So let's do that. So I'm going to say I have pi over 3 times 4 squared times, because 4 is the radius, times 7 for the height. So this is the whole thing for volume of a cone. And then to find the total volume, I'm going to add also the volume of the hemisphere, which is equal to half times 4/3 times pi times the radius, which is the same 4, cubed. And once I solve this, I'll have my answer. So let's start. This will be, we have pi over 3, and then 4 squared is 16. So then we have 16 times 7 is just going to be 112. So we have times 112 plus, we could cancel out, 2 goes into 2 one time, it goes into 4 2 times here. And then I could say 4 cubed is 64. So now I have 2 pi times 64, and then this also has the 3 on the bottom. So 2 pi over 3 times 64. So now let's just multiply each of these and then add them up. So this would just be 112 pi over 3 plus 64 times 2 is going to be 128 pi over 3. So now I'm going to add these up by adding the numerator. So that's going to give me 100 and, or hold on. Did I do that wrong? What did I do? Oh wait, no I didn't. Because I can always simplify, duh. Sorry, I had a moment. Okay, so now I'm going to add all these up. So 112 plus 128, that's going to be 240 pi over 3. So now 3 goes in evenly into 240 pi, so that would be 80 pi. So that would be my answer. A. Okay, pause read number 9 if you haven't already. So I like to write out my given information like this in a visually pleasing way because it helps me out. And I recommend a lot of people do that as well. So we want to find the question's asking the area of the original deck. Remember, it's in a square, so each of the sides is equal. That's why I did x and x. And then the new situation is going to be, okay, we're going to add 3 to one side, and then we're going to subtract 4 to the other. So it looks like this. And then the overall area for this new deck is going to be 144. Well, this new deck can't be a square anymore. It's going to be a rectangle. So area of a rectangle is length times width, right? we know the length and width, so we can plug those in to be x plus 3 and x minus 4. And we could say it's equal to the area being 144. And then now I just have to FOIL this out and solve for x. So FOIL, F stands for multiply the first things, x times x to get x squared. O stands for multiply the outer, so negative 4 times x, negative 4x. I stands for multiply the inner, so 3 times x, 3x. L stands for multiply the last thing, so 3 times negative 4, which is going to give you negative 12, and that equals 144. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine my like terms here to get negative x, so then it's just x squared minus x minus 12 is equal to 144. And then I'm going to subtract 144 from each side, so I have a quadratic equal to 0. So now I'm going to subtract 144 from each side, and that's going to give me x squared minus x, and then that's going to be minus 156 is equal to 0. Now, I know 12 times 13 gives me 156, so I'm going to try factoring this out to say that it has to be x times x, and then I need numbers that multiply to negative 156 and add up to negative x, so I'm going to say it's going to be negative 13 plus 12 there, because that's going to give me a negative when I multiply, and when I add them up, I get negative x. So now I know that x has to be equal to 13. I mean, technically x could be equal to negative 12, but you're not going to have a negative side length to get 0. That would have to be negative 12, or that would have to be 13. The only one that works logically would be it's a positive number, so 13. Now I can find the area here. Area for a square is going to be the side length squared. So you're going to say, okay, I know the side length is 13 now. Now I'm going to square it. And when I do that, I'm going to get 169. Okay, now for number 10, pause, read if you haven't already. Okay, so this is essentially the information we're given in a visual format. So the length is 3 times the width. That's what thrice means, 3 times. And then we just have regular width. I label with W. And the area is going to be 216 square feet. So if we know the area, and we know that area is also equal to length times width, we could say, oh, that means that the length times the width must equal 216. And we know that the width is equal to 3W, so I could say instead of L, 3W times W equals 216. And then this would become 3W squared is equal to 216. So then I need to divide by 3 on each side. And when I divide by 3 on each side, I would get W squared is equal to, and that's going to be 72, I believe. Yes, 72. And then I'm going to square root each side to get W by itself. So I'm going to get that W is equal to the square root of 72. I mean, you could simplify this. 4 probably goes into it, I think. Yeah, it does. But it doesn't matter really, because you have a calculator available to you. So like what you can do now is just say, oh, I know that the length is what I'm trying to find. Length is equal to 3W, right? So I know the length has to be 3 times that value of, this is supposed to be square root of 72. So you can just plug that in your calculator and then round to the nearest tenth, like it tells you. So when you plug that in your calculator, you're going to get that it's equal to 25.4558, yada, yada, yada. So we're rounding to the nearest tenth, so rounding to this place. Let's look at our neighbor. Our neighbor's a 5, so we're going to round up. So it would be 25.5 as our answer. Okay, now let's look at number 11. Pause, read if you haven't already. So this is essentially what we have here. I'm trying to draw it to the best of my ability. So like this little rectangle inside is the pool. So it has the 40 and the 30 as the length and the width. And then uniform, the uniform width of X feet, like for the tile path, just means like every which way that you go around, it's going to be going like X is like how long or wide it is, you know? So I kind of like wrote that here like that, is what these 4 X's represent. And then we know that the combined area of the pool plus the tile path, so basically the area of the big rectangle is equal to 1,700 square feet. And we want to find the value of X. So let's think how we could represent the length and width of the larger rectangle, because length times width gives you area. So the length of the larger rectangle could be 40, because you have the 40 right there, plus X amount this way and X amount this way, so plus 2X. And then you could apply that same sort of logic to the finding the width. So it's already 30 plus X going this way, X going this way, so 2X. And then length times width gives you the area, 1,700 square feet. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to say 40 plus 2X times 30 plus 2X. Actually, I'm going to put the X's first just because, like, I mean, it doesn't really matter, but it just bothers me visually not to do that. So 2X plus 40, same thing, times 2X plus 30 is equal to 1,700. So now let's FOIL, because we have 2 terms plus or minus in parentheses times 2 terms plus or minus in parentheses. So 2X times 2X is 4X squared. And then O stands for multiply the outer, so 30 times 2X is 60X. I stands for multiply the inner, so 40 times 2X is going to be 80X. L stands for multiply the last, so that's going to be 40 times 30. So it's going to be 12 and 2 zeros, so 1,200 equals 1,700. So now let's subtract 1,700 from each side so that we have a quadratic equal to 0. So that's going to give us, minus 500 over here. And then we're going to combine these like terms in the middle, 60x plus 80x, to get 140x. And then why don't we also divide the whole thing by 4? I mean, you don't have to if you don't want to, I guess, but it just makes it easier. Divide everything by 4, because I think 4 goes into each of these. Yeah. So 4x squared divided by 4 is 4. As long as you divide the whole equation by it, it's fine. And then, like, I couldn't just pick to do that divided by 4. I have to do every single thing. So now I have to do 140x divided by 4. So 140 divided by 4. I'm not even going to try doing that in my head because I know I'm going to mess up. 3, 12, 2, 0, 5. So that's going to be 35x. And then we're going to have 4 going into 500. So then that's going to be 1, 4, 0. Okay, then that's going to be 2, 8 minus 2, 0, and 5, 125. So then that's going to be minus 125 is equal to 0. So now I'm going to try to see, okay, can this easily be factored? Let me look at it for, probably can't easily be factored. That just doesn't seem like something that would be nice to factor. Let me think. Yeah, I don't think it can. So I'm going to just go ahead and use quadratic formula. So quadratic formula says this. And we figure out what A, B, and C are from this right here. A is the number being multiplied by x squared, B is the number being multiplied by x, and C is the number floating on by itself over here. So I'm going to plug those in for A, B, and C in the quadratic formula. So that's what I did right here. And now I'm just going to, I mean, technically you could just put this in your calculator. You just have to be careful with it and figure out what x is. So I'm going to do the part inside the square root first. So when I plug all that in, I get 1,725. And then all of this remains the same. So now basically you have two options. You could plus or minus this root 1,725 on top. So if I minus it, I know I'm going to get a negative value for sure, which remember x is like representing the uniform width, so it can't be negative. That doesn't make sense in the context. So I definitely have to add this on. So I'm going to do negative 35, and instead of trying out the minus, I'm just going to do plus all of this, plug that into my calculator, and divide by 2. And when I do that, what I get for x is going to be 3.2665, yada, yada, yada. And it says round your answer to the nearest hundredth. So this place value. So I look at my neighbor. My neighbor is it 5 or greater? Yes. So that means that my 6 has, right here in the hundredths place, has to go up to a 7. And I copy down the numbers before. So it should be 3.27.